Hello, my fellow chefs. Today we talk stocks, broths, and consommés, what the differences are, how to make them, and what we use them for. I am Mark Grigsby, your chef and guide through this experience, and this is the IncrEDIBLE Discourse. Before we get started, I wanted to update everyone on a couple of things. First, the website is nearing a point where we are comfortable to launch. My wife, who is also our marketing and media manager, has put together an amazing website where you can find out all that we do here on the IncrEDIBLE Discourse. We're still working out the YouTube channel where you can find all of my recipes in motion, but for now, the website will serve as the hub for all recipes, podcasts, and eventually merch and things like that. I try to give an update on every show to keep you all on top of what's going on. Now, let's talk business. So today I wanted to talk about stocks, broths, and consommés, the differences between them, the applications they're used for, and how to make them. I wanted to do this because the last two shows I have used a stock or a broth in the recipe, promised I would put up a recipe for them, and then I never did. I try to pre-plan a lot of these shows so that I can put together an interesting and informative piece to present to you. And as I was doing so, I realized that in many of these upcoming recipes, a stock or broth is included in the ingredients list. So naturally, I thought a tutorial of stocks and broths would be a healthy addition to the show. I like these three recipes because they are a base for many other recipes. With them, you can make many things like sauces for your meats with the stocks, soups and stews with the broths, and even appetizers like an aspic with the consommé. If you're into that kind of thing, I'm not real big into aspic. Now, there are many ways to make a stock, broth, or consommé, and this is not the be-all, end-all of the recipes, but it is a basic outline of how to prepare them. If you ask 20 different chefs how to make chicken stock, you will undoubtedly get 20 different answers. But this is my way, and I've used this method in many of my restaurants over many years. It works for what I use it for, and that's the objective. I'm sure these will work for you as well, and once you get the idea of how to make them, you can flavor it however you want to. Before we get into the recipes and how you make them, let's define what each of them are so that we have a basis of information. A stock is thought to have originated around the time fire was discovered as a way to extract every calorie from the animal. It was first used in cooking in the 18th century when the French system of sauces categorized stocks as a fundamental ingredient that could balance and harmonize a dish. It's made with the bones of the animal and is thicker in texture and consistency due to the gelatin that's extracted in the process. You wouldn't necessarily serve a stock on its own due to its consistency being thicker, but you would use it to make sauces or even as a thickening agent. The gelatin from the bones gives a richer mouthfeel, which is great for enhancing the body of dishes with rich sauces. It's usually simmered for 6 or more hours to extract this gelatin and provides a richer, more gelatinous texture when cooled. When we start getting into cooking fundamentals for stocks, we find out that there are really 3 that can be made: light stocks, dark stocks, and fumés. A light stock is made by simply boiling the bones, vegetables, and spices for a really long period to extract this gelatin. A dark stock is made by pre-roasting the bones before simmering them with flavorings and often has tomato paste incorporated into it. Blonde, white, or light stocks would be used for more mild flavor recipes like soups, but dark stocks would be used for more like braises due to their deeper and more complex flavor profiles. Fumés are quite versatile and are used for comfort dishes like fish soups, chowders, and stews. I'll do a separate show where I detail how to make a fumé. Now, books will tell you that there's a 4th stock, vegetable stock. But a stock is defined as using water to extract gelatin, right? Vegetable stock contains no gelatin and does not thicken when reduced. I believe that since it does not have the same properties as the other 3, it cannot be classified as stock. It's more of a broth than a stock. And I don't care what anyone else tells you, there isn't a such thing as vegetable stock. A broth is usually with the meat, fat, and some bones of the animal, plus some vegetables to create a flavorful, water-like consistency. It's usually fattier or oilier than a stock because the fat is added. Broths are served alone or with vegetables, meats, or herbs to create a soup. They are simmered for a lot shorter time than a stock to extract flavors, usually about 1 to 2 hours. These are great for simple soups. An example would be chicken noodle soup, where the chicken meat is often boiled and shredded and added to a light chicken broth with vegetables or pasta. The origins of cooking broths can be traced back to the Stone Age when people made stone soup by adding hot stones to water with leftover meat, bones, and fat. Now, the actual recipe of stone soup is more of a moral story than a recipe, but it can be traced far, far back nonetheless. The word broth comes from the Germanic word brew, which means to prepare by boiling, and dates back to 1000 CE. Early broth recipes can be made from either vegetables or animals, but by the 17th century, it was more commonly associated with meat. And lastly, the consommé. A consommé is a broth or stock that has been clarified by way of a raft of various ingredients, sometimes with proteins or vegetables mixed with egg whites to extract the impurities from the liquid and make it crystal clear. Legend has it that Louis XIV of France is said to have been responsible for the invention of the consommé when he ordered his chef to create a soup so clear that he could see his kingly reflection in it. Nowadays, a consommé is frequently seen as a starter dish or an amuse-bouche containing a garnish of mirepoix or vegetables. Consommés are also the base of aspics, which is a kind of meat jelly. It's important to note that all three of these soups can be and are generally made with vegetables, herbs, and spices as flavorings and can be modified in various ways depending on what your objective is. This is literally one of those things that when done correctly and applied correctly can take your dishes to a whole other level. Now that we've got that never-ending explanation out of the way, it's time to cook. Let's get in it. So today's show, we're going to go a little bit outside our previous structure. We usually talk about just one recipe, but today we're going to do 3. I want to do this so that the differences in preparation and application can be compared side by side. This way, we can really dissect what each of these soups are and why we make them differently and their various purposes. All of these soups are basically use the same equipment. You will need a decent-sized pot, probably about 8 to 10 quarts, enough so that you can stuff all of the carcasses and vegetables and all the other shit you're going to need to make this flavorful stock or broth or consommé. And you're also going to need a cutting board. You'll be breaking down a lot of animal parts and vegetables, so make sure you have one with a pretty good surface area to work with. Obviously, since you need a cutting board, you're going to need a chef's knife, right? I guess that's a duh, but you know I have to detail it. You'll need measuring equipment, spoons and cups, a slotted spoon, a fine mesh sieve or cheesecloth, and a second pot or a large bowl that you can strain the liquid into and separate the solids. You'll also need a little bit of kitchen twine, but if you don't have any, it's not a deal breaker. We can get by without it. And at the end, lastly, you're going to need airtight containers to store your liquids in. As with all of our recipes here at the IncrEDIBLE Discourse, I'll leave links in the description of some equipment that'll help you out with these recipes. Now, let's talk about the ingredients that you'll need to prepare these 3 recipes. This is where the deviation of structure begins. Traditionally, I list the ingredients and then we have to move on to the method, but because we're talking about multiple recipes and I don't want any confusion, I want to be able to detail how we make each recipe. So, I'm going to list the ingredients for the stock first, and then we're going to build around that. All of the recipes call for basically the same ingredients, just in different amounts, and some are cut differently. So, with that being said, this is what we're going to need to make a stock. I like to use stocks in various things. Yes, you can use it in soups and stews for a heartier, thicker base, but it's also good for making sauces and braising because when reduced, it thickens up and glistens, resulting in a sauce that coats your palate and hydrates your proteins or your vegetables. Today, we're going to use chicken across the board for all 3 recipes. It's cheap, it's easy to work with, and so let's start there. You're going to need 4 to 5 pounds of chicken carcasses or bones. I like to use a combination of carcass and feet. The feet contain a lot of gelatin and collagen, which is good for a variety of things. One, it gives you a rich, thick broth because of the gelatin, and then it's also high in protein from the collagen. You'll need some yellow onion, carrot, and celery rough chopped and some smashed garlic cloves. Now we're going to make a bouquet garni. For those unfamiliar with what that is, it's an old French technique where you tie herbs together. The bouquet is added in the beginning of the cooking process and cooked down to infuse an herbaceous and aromatic flavor, and then it's removed before serving. In this case, I'm going to use thyme and rosemary and tie them together using the twine I mentioned in our equipment list. I'll also need to get into the spice cabinet and grab a tablespoon of black peppercorn, a tablespoon of coriander seed, 2 bay leaves, and we need 4 quarts of water, and now we're ready to cook. First, I'm going to prepare the chicken and the vegetables. I need to rinse this chicken off under cold water to wash away any of the juices. These juices can make your stock cloudy, and we want to try to have the clearest stock possible. Next, I'm going to place the chicken, the vegetables, the spices, and the bouquet, and then I'm going to add the water. The ingredients should be submerged in the water before bringing this to a simmer. Not a boil, but a simmer. I'm going to cook this for 4 to 6 hours, adding water along the way if necessary, making sure that everything stays completely submerged. Now, this makes a blonde or a light stock. If I was going to make a dark stock, I would roast the bones and feet first until they have a deep color on them. Not burnt, but colored. Black would make the stock bitter, so I'd need to keep checking on the bones to make sure they're just right. Then I would add the bones to the vegetables, spices, herbs, and tomato paste, then add my water and simmer 4 to 6 hours, and my result would be a richer, darker stock. Anyhow, while the blonde stock is simmering, I'm going to skim the top of any foam or impurities. This will also aid in making sure my stock is as clear as possible. Once enough time has elapsed, the bones will start to break down and fall apart. When this happens, I remove the stock from the heat. Then I remove all the larger solid pieces with the slotted spoon, discard the solids, and then strain the remaining liquid through the fine mesh sieve or cheesecloth into the second pot or bowl. The recipe should yield about 8 to 12 cups of liquid and has to cool to room temperature before portioning it into the airtight containers. This is a crucial step. If you divide the stock, or anything else for that matter, while it's boiling hot and then cover it, it will spoil faster and create foodborne bacteria which can lead to illness. Very important step, guys. Once it's cooled and portioned, I refrigerate it overnight. By doing this, the fat will rise to the top and solidify, making it easier to remove. You'll need to do this before you store it permanently. You can refrigerate this for up to 5 days, or you can freeze it for up to 3 months. In my restaurants, I would make a huge abundance of dark stock, like 15 gallons at a time, and then we would freeze it. We used so much of it that it never went bad. I don't remember ever having to throw away stock, and we used it for so many things: sauces, soups, braises. It's a good way to store it so you're not making it all the time because it takes a considerable amount of time to do so. All right, let's talk about making a broth. I'd like to use broths for simple soups, stews, and chowders because of its light density. A broth is going to use the same exact ingredients, but instead of the chicken carcasses and feet, I'm going to use the dark meat and bones of the bird. So, I'm going to use the thigh, the leg, and the wings, all of them with the bones in. I place all of the ingredients into the pot, fill with water, and simmer 2 to 4 hours, adding water if the level dips below the ingredients. It's very important to keep everything submerged completely into the water to get the most flavor and gelatin out of the meat and bones. The longer the stock simmers, the more flavor I'm going to extract. Now, as I'm making this broth, one thing I'm going to notice that is different from the stock is that there is a considerable amount more of fat in the liquid due to the skin and fat remaining on the chicken. This is a good thing. This is flavoring my liquid in conjunction with the vegetables, herbs, and spices. After 2 to 4 hours, I'm going to remove the pot from the heat and use the slotted spoon to remove the solids. But rather than discard the chicken pieces, I'm going to set them aside to cool. There is good eating meat on these bones, and we shouldn't waste it. It can be used for so many things. If you're not going to use this meat in whatever your end game is here, let it cool, bag it, and refrigerate it, and use that shit later. All of the vegetables can be discarded. I'm going to strain the remaining liquid through the fine mesh sieve or cheesecloth into the second pot or bowl, and then let it get down to room temperature before portioning. This one should yield about 8 to 10 cups, and just like I did with the stock, I'm going to portion it and chill it overnight so that the fat and oil rises to the top so I can remove it easier the next day. This will keep just like the stock, 5 days refrigerated, 3 months frozen. Now, I'm sure we've gotten this far and you've wondered, how come we didn't salt anything throughout this process? And the answer is this. A stock or broth is usually used as a component of a dish. If you salt it now or throughout the process of making it, it could result in throwing off the salt balance in the dish that it is a component of. Does that make sense? In other words, if you salt the broth or stock and add it to the sauce you're trying to make that also contains salt, your shit's going to be salty. Always season your end product. You can always add salt, but you can't always take it out. Actually, you can't ever take it out, so always salt your end product. This is the basic way to make stocks and broths, and you can substitute and change all of the ingredients to your liking or based on whatever your application will be. If you don't like onion flavor in your stock, don't add fucking onions. If you don't have herbs, you don't have to have them. The critical components of these two recipes are the protein and the water. Those two you have to have. So, veal bones and water make veal stock, or lamb scraps and water make lamb broth. Duck carcasses and water make, that's right, duck stock, and so on. The mirepoix, spices, and herbs simply give your stock or broth a complexity and boost of flavor. You don't even have to use traditional mirepoix if you don't want to. Use fucking parsnips, leeks, and garlic, or whatever you want, or whatever you have on hand. This is why stocks and broths are so versatile, because there are an endless amount of combinations to flavor them. Get creative. Fucking explore. Next, I want to talk about consommés, and I purposely saved this one for last. I did this because you need a stock or a broth in order to make this recipe. Remember that a consommé is a clarified stock or broth, so naturally you would need to make one of the previous recipes to make this particular one. Let's go with the stock in this recipe, okay? So now the ingredients list for this process is a little bit more detailed and refined. I'm going to need 2 pounds of ground chicken, 8 cups of chicken stock, 4 large egg whites, 2 bay leaves, a teaspoon of black peppercorns, and a bouquet garni of parsley and thyme. I'm also going to need a mirepoix of onion, carrot, celery, and garlic, but instead of rough chopping the vegetables and smashing the garlic like I did in the previous 2 recipes, I'm going to finely mince all of the vegetables. All of these ingredients will help the consommé retain flavor while the egg whites clarify the liquid. Now, the only piece of equipment that I will need outside of exactly what I used in the previous 2 recipes is a mixing bowl and a ladle. Inside that mixing bowl, I'm going to combine the ground chicken, the egg white, the mirepoix, and the garlic. I'm going to mix this and form a paste-like consistency with these ingredients and set aside for a few minutes while I'm preparing everything else. In the first large pot, I'm going to add the stock, the peppercorns, the bay leaves, and my bouquet, and then I'm going to add the chicken paste mixture. I'm going to crank the heat to medium and slowly bring this mixture to a gentle simmer. It's important to note that it has to be a gentle simmer because I don't want to fuck the raft up that I'm trying to make. Raft in air quotes there. This is the entire purpose of what I'm doing. If the raft fucks up, the liquid will not clarify and I've wasted time and product for some bullshit. As the liquid heats, the egg whites and chicken will coagulate and rise to the surface, forming this raft. Do not stir or mix the liquid once this happens. Do not fuck the raft up. Once I've got a simmer going, I'm going to reduce the heat to low and make a small hole in the center of the raft using a spoon. This hole should be big enough to fit the ladle through, but it shouldn't be huge. This will allow the consommé to simmer gently without disturbing the raft. I'm going to cook this for about an hour and let the raft work its magic. After the time has elapsed, I'm going to remove this from the heat, being careful not to slosh it around, keeping in mind the security of the raft. I'm going to ladle the liquid out through the hole I made, through the fine mesh sieve or cheesecloth, into the second pot or large bowl, making sure that all of the solids are removed. Discard the raft at the bottom of the pot. Now I'm going to taste this shit and adjust my seasonings. This is the end product, so I want to make sure it tastes good. Now I'm ready to serve. I can add some finely chopped mirepoix or mushroom to a dish and pour this hot consommé over it, or I can get super fancy and I can make a royale of egg custard, mold it and shape it and add it as a garnish. Seems like a lot of work for such a simple dish, but the end game is a beautiful clear soup that will highlight whatever you choose to put in it. And that's it. Today I detailed how I make a stock, a broth, and a consommé. The differences in production and the 3 applications that each will work for. As crazy as it sounds, after all the work put into making these 3, they are simply a component of a larger, more refined dish in most cases. But it is the building of flavor, complexity, and texture that these components offer that'll take your cooking to the next level. Now it's time for food for thought, or what I like to call pro tips from a chef's lips. Because we ran through 3 recipes today, I'm not going to talk about 2 pro tips on this particular show. I'll just do 1. And this one ties the whole day's lesson together. This part of the discourse can apply to home or professional cooks, and that's the importance of knowing how and why to make your own stocks and broths. Never mind the consommé right now. That's kind of a specialty dish on its own right. But stocks and broths are almost an essential thing to know how to do. Why? Because these components will provide an element of deep flavor and complexity in your dishes. For instance, in our first episode, we talked about shrimp and grits. and one of the components of the dish was chicken stock, right? Imagine if you would have used a bouillon cube and water for your chicken stock rather than actually making it. Everyone has had bouillon before. There are those little packets that come with the prepackaged, hard noodle, microwavable ramen that you're probably eating right now while you're listening to the Incredible Discourse, or those little cubes wrapped in aluminum foil that come in the box that costs $1.50. And sure, it tastes okay, but it's surely one-dimensional. It's salty, it's savory, but it has no texture or complexity. The shrimp and grits would be flat, and the sauce would do absolutely no justice to the dish. The same goes for the short rib braise we did in our last episode. You could use water, of course, but when you strain the sauce and then reduce it, would you get that depth of dark, rich flavor? Fuck no, you wouldn't. And that's a key to that particular dish's success. Without the sauce, it just becomes a soft piece of meat. It almost begs to have that rich, toothsome sauce that coats your palate and keeps you coming back for more. And as a professional cook or chef, that's what you're reaching for, that perfect bite that you cannot help but to come back to. And that's what ties the entire dish together. Building flavor is what it's all about, and this is a basic skill that helps tremendously. And if you're at home and taking the time to braise something for hours, why the hell would you wait hours on end for a subpar product? Would it entice you to do it again? Chances are it wouldn't. But if you upped your game and brought out the big guns with a bangin'-ass sauce that everybody loved, you'd instantly become a hero, and your friends and family would regard you a legend and likely ask you to make it again and again and again and again. And that warm feeling of appreciation and success you will get will likely get your ass back in the kitchen slaving once again for that glorious satisfaction on all their faces. Learning how to make stocks and broths and then executing the techniques well will most likely result in a better end product every time. Your soups and stews game will increase incredibly, your braises will be on point, and your sauces luscious. I used to work for a chef that used to ask chefs who were coming in to do a stage for a job to make a soup. I used to think that it was unusual because normally when you go on a stage, the chef wants to see your knife work or how well you can cook a steak to temperature or your fish butchering skills. And although there were different components of that stage that displayed those skills, yes, she still wanted them to make a soup. And she said if someone can make water taste amazing, they know how to infuse flavor. If they can make water taste good, they can make anything taste good. Now, me, I don't know about anything because I've met some cooks who make great soups, but they burn the shit out of some proteins or they can't blanch and shock vegetables to save their lives. But I do agree that making water taste great is a considerable skill. Anyway, try these recipes. They'll be up on the IncredibleDiscourse.com. Make your own variations and let me know what you came up with and what you used them for. I love hearing your feedback and the stories of your creativity in motion. Keep cooking, keep building, keep learning. If you liked what you heard today, leave me 5 stars on Spotify or a great review wherever you're listening to this, and make sure you visit us at theincrediblediscourse.com and all of our socials when they come up. I appreciate your time as always. I'm Mark Grigsby, and you've just been put through the Incredible Discourse. Till next time, where's my theme music?